Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night to do what we do, and what we do is to help you understand what is going on in the world. We look at life through a biblical lens. I ran across an article this week by a gal who was talking about raising children with good values. What is really the most important things? What should we be about? What should we do? What should we not do? How do we define all of this, and what is it? Good values are those which produce good people, good results. But even if they don't produce the good people and the good results, the good values are still important. One of the statements that apparently is being made in this regard, and it is in context with raising children, where a parent would say, I'm doing my part to make society a better place by raising kids with good values. Well, what does that mean? I mean, raising kids with good values is not the same as raising good kids. There are two important reasons why that's true. First, without universal acceptance of an objective moral standard, and the only objective moral standard we have comes from God, society is always going to disagree about what's right, what's wrong, which values are good. If you don't have God as your standard, the goodness of your value system is just that. It's your system, and it's a matter of opinion. Mine's different, mine's better than yours. No, mine's better than yours. Well, what's your measure? One person can claim abortion is morally acceptable, and another person can say it's murder. Who's to say which is which? Good values can't rescue a society when there will never be fundamental agreement on how to define what's good in the first place. In addition, the fundamental problem in a troubled society isn't a lack of values. The fundamental problem is sinful human nature. It's what Jesus came and died for. And even if everybody agreed on the same set of objective moral values, they'd still sin and act contrary to those values. Society's deepest need is for spiritual healing, not more people with good values, however you might define those values. We need more people who know and love Jesus, who acknowledge the ever-present reality of sin as the world's ultimate problem, and people who accept the sacrifice of Christ as the solution to that problem. We are searching for peace on earth, but the Bible tells us there will never be complete peace on earth. However, when we as Christian parents are focused on raising kids who love the Lord, not just raising kids with good values, we're raising a generation that can impact society where it matters in terms of eternity. And we can do that in a significant way. We do it by raising more witnesses for Christ. Another false philosophy might be, don't waste time teaching kids the falsities of other people's beliefs. Teach them the truth of Jesus Christ. Well, it's well known, based on multiple independent research studies over more than a decade, that at least 60% of kids who grow up in Christian homes turn away from faith as young adults. They don't follow through. Now, I don't know what the statistic was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I'm guessing it was not 60%. But it's assumed that these kids learned the truth of Jesus Christ and then turned away as they encountered false claims, things that made better sense to them on whatever level. In a society that's quickly turning away from God, such an assumption can be dangerous. Because most churches in the United States are not teaching the truths of God's Word to anyone. And the biggest and the most popular are focused simply on entertainment. Let one of these so-called pastors call his folks out for sin. Any sin that the Bible might list, with a clear condemnation that's aimed at you, and see how long that church lasts, or see how long that pastor lasts. I have told you this all of your life. Preaching is what God has ordained for the church and for Christians, not sharing, not even teaching, preaching. And preaching is propositional. You've seen the Bible Forum website, you get the Bible Forum email. What do you see? You see a crazy old man pointing his finger at you, because that's preaching. That's why contemporary so-called preachers don't do it. You know what that feels like. Don't point that finger at me. Preaching proposes a response. It says, you need to pay attention to this and respond this way. That's what God ordained. Not sharing. Sharing's a wonderful thing. Doesn't change a whole lot. And kids are increasingly exposed to claims against Christianity at exponentially increasing rates, and some of that is happening in their home. It's happening because parents allow them access to all kinds of media. When they start to see their beliefs in the context of those claims, they have to know which one is true and which one is false. Not only that, they have to know what the dangers are, the pitfalls. Think of it this way. Just because a football team knows what to do when they have a ball at practice with no opponents around doesn't mean they'll know what to do when thousands of pounds of force come at them in a real game. If they don't know what the other team will do and how to respond, they'll fumble. They'll make poor plays. They'll be pushed back. Similarly, our kids aren't living in a Christian vacuum. Thousands of pounds of force are coming at their beliefs. And you can ignore it, but statistics show that your kid's faith will likely not stand up after it's been knocked down by today's influences. So why would you not prepare them for all of that? And why would you deliberately expose them to any of it? Thirdly, God is in control, so whatever happens in our society is meant to happen. I'm not going to be concerned about it. That's a common philosophy. And it's partly true. Of course, God is sovereign. Nothing's going to happen outside of God's will. But it's not biblical to sit back and watch the world unfold because God is ultimately in control. Did God tell the Israelites, just chill out, don't be concerned about the Canaanites? I'm in control. The ship is sailing regardless of what you do. No, he commanded the Israelites to wage war against the Canaanite society. The Israelites were used by God to execute judgment against them. Did you realize that Israel was put on this planet to be a blessing to all men? That they didn't do that is part of the problem. Did Jesus tell the disciples, hey, just hang out here in Jerusalem after I'm gone. I'll make sure the rest of the world hears the good news about me? No. He commissioned witnesses of his life, death, and resurrection to go out and to tell the world about him, to be willing to suffer, to bleed, to die in the process. The fact of God's sovereignty has never meant that we should relegate our faith to whatever status society wants to place on it. If we care about the world our kids are growing into, We must be concerned about society's changing moral and legal landscape and be willing to act on that accordingly. Fourthly, the statement, my kids will learn what they need to know about the Bible in church. Well, we've already talked about that, haven't we? That's never been absolutely true, and today it's not even close, not in most churches. We're going to raise kids who will represent Jesus in a society that's spiraling out of control downward. They better be prepared to speak the truth of the Bible, God's Word, to people in all societies. You see, the Bible is what tells us where we came from. We came from God. The Bible tells us why we're here, to have a relationship with God. The Bible tells us the most significant problem we face is sin. Sin leading to separation from God. The Bible tells us the history of God, bringing a solution to that problem. His name is Jesus. It tells us how we should live our lives in response by putting Jesus first. And it tells us where we're going, to a final judgment, the judgment of the entire world. Research shows that fewer than 1 in 10 Christian families read the Bible together in a given week. I would say it's less than that. The assumption is that kids will learn what they need to learn about or know about the Bible at church. But that's not true. When we don't read or study the Bible with our kids, the kids end up with wrong understandings, wrong beliefs, wrong philosophies. It stunts their spiritual growth. It limits their understanding. It condemns them to an out-of-balance world view. There's a lot of things that kids need to learn about the Bible that are never covered in Sunday school. We learn how many books there are in the Bible, but do we learn how the books in the Bible were selected? Why were books left out of the Bible? How do we know we can trust the Bible's authors? How do we know the Bible we have today says what the authors originally wrote? And what about the supposed errors, the contradictions we all hear about in the Bible? All of these questions are favorites for the skeptics when they come after your children. And your kids won't know what to make of all of their claims if you've assumed that they'll learn all this in church. Do you know the answers to those questions? If you were to sign up and take the Bible Institute course that's offered on my website, you would. That's the first thing we talk about. The last thing that parents tend to think about is, or value, is the fact that things are not going to really get that bad. Oh yeah, okay, it's not going to be perfect, but they won't be that bad. This is a giant, deceptive, destructive belief system. There are places in the world where Christians face persecution that we've never seen in America. But if that's your standard of bad, it may be true that things won't get bad. But there are other kinds of bad that would represent an enormous change in the way of life for Christians in America. Kinds of bad that are quickly becoming a reality, faster than any of us imagined. Every week, perhaps every day, there's a new headline that has negative implications for religious liberty in our country. Those headlines are going to keep rolling in. You can ignore them. You can assume that things aren't going to be all that bad. This is America. But it is way worse than it was when I was a kid. And it's going to get a lot worse. So who will you vote for in November? Will you vote? We need to understand the what and the who. And we also need to be able to vote wisely meaning that we don't violate our convictions, we don't violate our conscience. And that's getting harder. I'm afraid that most true Christians have ceased to pay attention to these mundane things like politics because it's so crass, it's so evil, it's so hypocritical. And that may be easy. But do you have grandchildren? I have great-grandchildren. I shudder to think what they're going to grow up in.